Movies didn't simplify the West, they rewrote it. Today, 33 dumb Wild West myths people still believe because Hollywood made them catchy. Like the OK Corral turning into a clean duel when it was chaos. Or every cowboy living in a saloon when most nights were bedrolls. Stay for number 33, because the last one is insane. High noon street duels were rare, not daily rituals. Real showdowns usually ended before a crowd even formed. In 1865 Springfield, Wild Bill Hickok faced Davis Tutt publicly. They paced apart on the square, like a courtroom turned outside. One shot hit Tutt, and the whole town froze silent. That duel became famous because it was so unusual. Most killings were ambushes, arguments, or drunken chaos after dark. Sheriffs preferred fines and arrests, not theatrical countdowns at noon. Newspapers exaggerated rare gunfights, and movies copied the headlines. So when you see daily duels, remember Hickok was the exception. 2. Cowboys weren't all white. Many were black and Mexican. Hollywood erased huge parts of the workforce that built ranching. After the Civil War, Texas ranches hired black cowboys in thousands. Bosie Card rode with Charles Goodnight on long, brutal drives. Nat Love later described roping contests and stampedes on the trail. Mexican vaqueros brought the lariat, chaps, and much of the vocabulary. Spanish words like rodeo and bronco survived because the skills worked. On Kansas railheads like Abilene, crews mixed languages and hard habits. Yet posters and films kept recasting the West as one face. If you want realism, start with who actually did the work. 3. Cowboys didn't spend every night in swinging door saloons. Most nights ended with beans, coffee, and exhaustion, not whiskey. On cattle drives up the Chisholm Trail, the chuck wagon was home. Cowboys slept under bedrolls, watching for storms and drifting cattle. When they reached Abilene or Dodge City, paydays felt like fireworks. Then the money often vanished fast on food, gear, and lodging. Many towns had strict closing hours, especially after trouble started. Some cowboys avoided saloons entirely and sent wages back home. Trail bosses hated drunken hands because accidents ruined whole herds. So the nonstop saloon montage is mostly a payday exaggeration. 4. The OK Corral 30-second gunfight wasn't Hollywood clean. That famous shootout was over so fast, witnesses argued about everything. On October 26, 1881, Tombstone lawmen confronted armed cowboys on Fremont Street. Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp walked in with Doc Holliday. Ike and Billy Clanton stood nearby with Tom and Frank McLaury. It happened beside C.S. Fly's studio, not inside the corral. Shots erupted at close range, and smoke hid who fired first. About 30 rounds flew in roughly 30 seconds, nothing cinematic. Afterward came hearings, grudges, and a spiral of revenge across Arizona. The legend feels neat, but the real scene was messy panic. 5. Wyatt Earp wasn't a pure, untouchable white hat hero. Wyatt Earp's story twists because he lived on both sides. Before Tombstone, he worked as a lawman and a gambler. In Dodge City, he enforced order while floating around saloons and games. In Tombstone, his rivalry with Sheriff Johnny Behan got intensely personal. After the OK Corral, politics turned poisonous, and threats multiplied. When Morgan Earp was killed, Wyatt formed a posse and struck back. That vendetta ride blurred lines between warrant, revenge, and survival. Later biographies polished him into a saint, smoothing every sharp edge. A real frontier figure was complicated, and Earp absolutely was. 6. Jesse James wasn't a Robin Hood for the poor. Jesse James became a folk hero, but his victims stayed broke. He grew up in Missouri, shaped by Civil War guerrilla violence. With the James Younger Gang, he robbed banks, trains, and stagecoaches. In 1873, near Adair, Iowa, they stopped a Rock Island train. Money went to the gang, not to widows or struggling farmers. Sometimes bystanders were hurt because robberies rarely stayed controlled. In 1876, at Northfield, Minnesota, the town fought back hard. That failure ended the mythic streak, but the legend kept growing. Robin Hood sells tickets, yet Jesse James mostly stole for himself. 7. Billy the Kid didn't kill 21 men. That 21 tally made him mythical, but records don't cooperate. William H. Bonney, called Billy the Kid, fought in New Mexico. During the Lincoln County War, he rode with the regulators in 1878. Murders were blamed on him, yet many claims came from rumor mills. Historians can tie him to about 9 killings with decent evidence. He helped shoot Sheriff William Brady, and suddenly, headlines exploded. After escaping jail in Lincoln, his face became wanted poster currency. Pat Garrett tracked him to Fort Sumner, ending the chase in 1881. The legend counted years, but the paper trail counts far fewer bodies. 8. Six-shooters didn't fire forever without reloading. Movie revolvers seem endless, but real cylinders emptied fast. A Colt single-action army held 6 rounds, then went quiet. To reload, you opened the loading gate and worked one chamber. Each spent casing had to be pushed out one at a time. Under stress, fingers fumbled, and cartridges dropped into dust. Black powder fouling also made action sticky after repeated shots. That's why many carried extra guns, not magical bottomless ammo. In Tombstone, Holiday brought a shotgun because it solved problems. So when heroes fire forever, remember the math says otherwise. 9. Revolvers weren't laser accurate at long range while galloping. Long-range pistol shots look easy on film, but reality wobbles. Revolvers had tiny sights, heavy triggers, and inconsistent ammunition. Now add a galloping horse, bouncing your arm like a spring. Even skilled shots like Wild Bill Hickok preferred steady footing. His famous Tut duel happened on a town square, not horseback. On the trail, riders used rifles or shotguns when distance mattered. Many real gunfights happened within a few yards, almost point blank. That closeness came from fear, smoke, and bad visibility in streets. So the horseback bullseye is mostly modern choreography in spurs. 10. Everyone didn't carry a Colt Peacemaker all the time. The Colt Peacemaker became iconic, but it wasn't universal gear. In the 1870s, it cost real money many workers lacked. Plenty carried older cap and ball revolvers or cheap pocket pistols. Ranch hands often grabbed a rifle because predators and distance existed. Wells Fargo messengers favored shotguns, especially on risky routes. Some townspeople carried nothing because daily life was errands and chores. In places like Tombstone, local ordinances limited weapons inside town. That meant guns got checked at livery stables, not worn proudly. Hollywood hands everyone the same Colt, like a costume department. 11. Shotguns weren't always pocket cannons for every bar fight. A shotgun was devastating up close, but it was not casual carry. Coach guards used short double barrels because bandits targeted shipments. Those guns rode in wagons, not tucked under every gambler's coat. In Tombstone, Doc Holliday carried one on a specific tense day. Inside most saloons, a long gun was awkward and instantly alarming. Owners wanted customers drinking, not everyone waving farm tools indoors. Many fights were fists, bottles, or knives before anyone drew firearms. When guns appeared, people often ran because nobody wanted accidents. The Constant Barham shotgun is a movie shortcut for instant stakes. 12. Most bounty hunters weren't lone wolves with wanted posters. The lone bounty hunter is cool, but the real system was paperwork. Rewards existed, yet sheriffs usually formed posses from local neighbors. Railroads and banks hired detectives, like the Pinkerton Agency, for leads. Those operatives gathered tips, tracked travel, and coordinated with lawmen. Wanted circulars traveled by telegraph and mail, not dramatic wall posters. Many rewards required a court conviction, not just dragging someone in. Chasing strangers across territories was expensive, risky, and rarely profitable. That's why most arrests came from familiarity, gossip, and local pressure. So the wandering poster hunter is more legend than everyday job. 13. Sheriffs didn't rule towns like tiny kings. Frontier law looked rough, but it still had rules and bosses. A county sheriff was elected, and voters could dump him quickly. Town marshals answered to mayors, councils, and local business owners. In Dodge City, merchants pressured officials whenever violence hurt trade. Sheriffs also fought budgets, jail space, and political rivals daily. Some were corrupt, sure, but many were just overworked administrators. When trouble hit, they needed deputies and a posse to act. That dependence kept power spread out, not concentrated in one badge. Movies crowned one sheriff, yet real towns were messy committees. 14. Frontier towns weren't constantly overrun by outlaws. If towns were non-stop war zones, nobody would invest or move. Most places were boring: stores, churches, schools, and dusty routines. Cattle towns like Abilene exploded seasonally when herds arrived. After drives ended, population shrank and the streets quieted again. Serious violence clustered around railheads, gambling, and alcohol spikes. Even Dodge City tried curfews, fines, and strict weapon policies. Outlaws preferred isolated targets, not crowded streets full of witnesses. That's why robberies hit banks and trains at vulnerable moments. So the permanent outlaw takeover is a myth built for drama. 15. Saloons didn't always feature pianos, dancers, and daily brawls. A saloon could be loud or surprisingly calm and ordinary. Many were simple bars with tables, spittoons, and a back room. In Virginia City or Deadwood, some added gambling to pull minors in. Music happened when someone could play, not because a pianist spawned. Dancing girls appeared in certain venues, often called dance halls. Other saloons banned rowdy behavior to keep steady-paying customers. Owners hired bouncers to toss troublemakers before chaos spread. That's why the same saloon scene repeats in every Western. The real West had variety, not one endless honky-tonk template. 16. Poker games didn't end in shootouts every other hand. If poker ended in gunfire nightly, casinos would have vanished fast. Most games ended with someone grumbling, paying up, and leaving. In Deadwood in 1876, Wild Bill Hickok played at Saloon Number 10. He worried about sitting with his back to the door. A drifter named Jack McCall returned after losing money and pride. He shot Hickok from behind, and the room turned to ice. That killing became famous precisely because it wasn't normal poker etiquette. Later stories invented constant shootouts, as if cards summoned bullets. Real tension was social, not automatic violence every time chips slid. 17. Cowboys weren't all skilled card sharps and smooth talkers. Most cowboys were teenagers with sunburn, blisters, and little cash. They learned knots in cattle, not fancy banter and perfect shuffles. After weeks on trail, many barely wanted conversation, just sleep. Professional gamblers existed, like Doc Holliday, but they weren't ranch hands. In cowtowns, hustlers targeted tired drovers fresh off payday. That's why trail bosses warned men about games they couldn't read. Some cowboys avoided poker and played simple dice or dominoes instead. Hollywood turns every rider into a witty con artist in boots. Real cowboy charm was endurance, not always wordplay and sleight. 18. Cowboy hats, weren't standard issue for every Westerner. The classic tall hat is mostly a later symbol, not uniform. John B. Stetson designed the Boss of the Plains in 1865. Working men also wore bowlers, caps, and slouch hats for rain. Look at tombstone photos and you'll spot plenty of derby hats. Wide brims made sense on open range, but towns favored practicality. Mexican sombreros influenced shapes, especially across Texas and Arizona. Hats got creased by use, not by costume designers choosing silhouettes. Wild West shows and early films standardized the look for audiences. So the cowboy hat became a logo, not a daily requirement. 19. Spurs and jingles didn't announce every bad guy's entrance. Movies used jingling spurs like a villain soundtrack cue. On real ranches, spurs were tools for riding, not theatrics. Many cowboys saved spurs for long days, not for town errands. Some dulled the noise with leather straps because clanking annoyed horses. In saloons, loud spurs also signaled trouble to bouncers watching doors. Quiet boots helped gamblers and thieves move without attracting attention. Photographs show plenty of working men without spurs at all. Hollywood kept the jingle because sound instantly tells you danger. In life, the loudest entrants usually belonged to tourists and drunks. 20. Everyone didn't call each other partner and pardner. The West wasn't one accent, so catchphrases didn't travel uniformly. In San Antonio, you'd hear Spanish, German, and English in one block. On cattle drives, crews used surnames, nicknames, and plain orders. In mining towns, immigrants argued in Irish, Chinese, and Italian. Letters from Kansas and Colorado show surprisingly formal speech patterns. Slang existed, but it changed by region, job, and decade. Writers later sprinkled partner everywhere because it sounded instantly Western. Radio and film froze that slang, like Amber trapping a mosquito. If everyone talks the same, it's a script, not a street. 21. Stagecoach robberies weren't an everyday, guaranteed event. Stagecoach travel was risky, but constant robberies would bankrupt companies. Wells Fargo ran thousands of trips where nothing happened but dust. Outlaws like Black Bart struck in California, then vanished into forests. His polite stick-ups became famous because they were unusual and bold. Most robbers needed insider tips about shipments, guards, and schedules. Guards sometimes rode with shotguns, making easy scores far less likely. Coaches also switched routes or times after a single attempted robbery. Newspapers loved the drama and reprinted every incident for weeks. So Hollywood turned rare shocks into an everyday commute hazard. 22. Train robberies were big news because they were uncommon. A train robbery shook people because railroads felt like modern safety. They searched cars quickly, grabbed cash, and disappeared into the night. Railroad companies spread descriptions by telegraph, faster than horses could ride. Later gangs, like Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, copied the spectacle. Still, most trains ran daily without a single masked rider aboard. Robbing a train meant planning, luck, and an escape route nobody blocked. One mistake brought posses, detectives, and newspaper maps of your trail. That rarity is why the image stuck, like soot on a lantern. 23. U.S. cavalry didn't always arrive at the last second. Movies love a bugle rescue, but history often says otherwise. In 1876, George Custer's 7th Cavalry rode into Little Bighorn. No reinforcements appeared in time, and the outcome shocked America. Distance, terrain, and bad scouting made the army move blindly. Messages between columns were slow, and plans changed under pressure. Other campaigns saw troops arrive late, or not at all. Sometimes settlers waited days for help that never came. That harsh reality shaped frontier choices, like forts and militias. So the last-second cavalry charge is mostly a cinematic comfort blanket. 24. Indian war whoops and endless charges were a stereotype. Hollywood turned native warfare into one noisy sound effect loop. Different nations fought differently, from Comanche raids to Lakota defenses. Some battles involved long standoffs, negotiation, or strategic withdrawals. Scouts, including native allies, often guided U.S. troops through unfamiliar land. War cries existed, but they weren't non-stop chanting during every ride. Filmmakers reused the same audio cues, flattening real cultures into noise. Survivor accounts describe confusion, dust, and sudden silence as much. Even the term Indian hides hundreds of distinct peoples and languages. Once you notice the stereotype, every Western battle scene feels recycled. 25. Native peoples weren't one single culture or look. The biggest myth is treating Indigenous America like one costume. Navajo families in the Southwest live differently than Lakota on plains. Pacific Northwest tribes built cedar houses, not teepees on open grass. The Cherokee had written laws and newspapers long before the 1870s. In 1877, the Nez Perce fled across mountains with families and herds. Languages, foods, and politics shifted every few hundred miles. Hollywood ignored that complexity, using generic clothing and generic villains. Even alliances changed, with some nations fighting alongside U.S. forces. Real history gets sharper when you name the specific people involved. 26. Settlers didn't build towns overnight, in a montage. Boomtowns grew fast, but not in one magical afternoon of hammers. Railroad companies surveyed routes, then land agents marketed lots aggressively. When the 1889 Oklahoma Land Run opened, Guthrie exploded almost instantly. Yet streets were mud, tents everywhere, and basics still missing. Wells, lumber, and brick had to arrive by wagon or rail. Fires routinely erased whole blocks, forcing towns to rebuild again. Courts, schools, and newspapers took years to stabilize community life. That slow grind mattered more than the first dramatic day. Montages skipped the hardest part, staying alive after the excitement. 27. Whiskey shots weren't the default breakfast of the frontier. Frontier mornings usually begin with coffee, strong enough to wake rocks. On ranches, breakfast was biscuits, bacon, beans, or whatever shipped well. During drives, the cook guarded supplies like a quartermaster on campaign. Whiskey cost money, and drunk riders caused wrecks and lost cattle. Many communities had churches and temperance groups pushing against saloons. Some towns taxed alcohol heavily to fund roads and basic services. Diaries describe hangovers as disasters, not heroic rituals before work. Hard drinking happened, but it was more payday than daily fuel. Hollywood serves whiskey at dawn because it looks instantly tough. 28. Saloons rarely had those iconic swinging doors. Those batwing doors are a visual shorthand, not standard architecture. In cold places like Montana, open gaps would leak heat constantly. Many saloons used solid doors so owners could lock up overnight. Some had curtains or vestibules to block dust from the street. Photographs from boomtowns show storefronts that look like ordinary shops. Swinging doors also made it hard to control who entered quickly. Bartenders wanted to spot troublemakers before they crossed the threshold. Movies kept bat wings because they frame a silhouette perfectly. Real entrances were practical, not designed for dramatic boot kicks. 29. Tumbleweeds weren't a symbol of every Wild West town. The tumbleweed is iconic, yet it arrived after much early frontier. Russian thistle showed up in the 1870s in South Dakota. It likely hitched a ride as contaminated flaxseed from the Russian Empire. Then rail cars and prairie winds spread it west like rolling confetti. Early cowtowns in Kansas didn't automatically have those bouncing balls. Filmmakers loved them because they screen emptiness with zero dialogue. Real streets were crowded with wagons, animals, and shouting merchants. Even today, tumbleweed piles happen in specific weather and terrain. So the rolling weed is a later invader turned movie mascot. 30. The West wasn't always a desert. Many towns were green. Hollywood paints the West as sand, but much of it was grass. Kansas Cowtown sat beside rivers, cottonwoods, and flooded bottoms. Montana valleys held farms, not endless dunes and cactus silhouettes. The Oregon Trail crossed prairies, then forests thick enough to swallow sound. Mining camps in Colorado looked alpine, with snowstorms and timber. Even Arizona had mountain towns, cool nights, and pine trees. Studio locations favored deserts because they filmed well and stayed sunny. That choice trained our brains to expect sepia everywhere. Real landscapes were as varied as the people chasing their luck. 31. Cowboys weren't mostly gunfighters. They were working ranch hands. The biggest surprise is how unglamorous cowboy life really was. Most days meant riding fence lines, fixing gates, and hauling water. Branding season brought smoke, noise, and calves slipping everywhere. On drives from Texas to Kansas, stamp seed risk felt constant. The Chisholm Trail was more boredom and danger than gunplay. A cowboy's best tools were rope, saddle, and a good horse. Gunfights were bad for business because injured hands slowed everything. That's why ranch owners hired calm riders, not trigger-happy showboats. So the gunfighter cowboy is a costume stitched over hard labor. 32. Women weren't just damsels. Many worked the frontier. Frontier survival depended on women doing far more than waiting. Homesteaders' wives hauled water, planted gardens, and defended cabins. In Deadwood, Martha Canary, called Calamity Jane, worked tough jobs. Mary Fields, nicknamed Stagecoach Mary, carried mail in Montana snow. Annie Oakley toured with Buffalo Bill, outshooting many men on stage. Women also ran boarding houses, stores, and newspapers in growing towns. Divorce and property laws varied, but some women owned businesses outright. Films often hide them to keep the story a boys' playground. Once you look, women's names are everywhere in frontier records. 33. Everyone didn't ride horses everywhere. Walking and wagons ruled. Most people walked because horses were expensive and needed constant care. In towns, wagons hauled goods, and kids ran errands on foot. Railroads connected big distances, turning week-long rides into day trips. Miners often traveled by pack mule, not a heroic stallion. Cities like San Francisco even had streetcars before the century ended. Keeping a horse meant feed, water, stable fees, and lost time. That's why many travelers rented horses only for specific stretches. Hollywood keeps everyone mounted because it looks instantly adventurous. Real mobility was practical, and often painfully slow too.